Hello YouTube. Today we're continuing off our puzzle building, puzzle modding tutorial series. And today I'm going to pass on my knowledge of apoxie sculpt. I've only used this brand of apoxie sculpt, avestudio.com epoxy sculpt. Another word for it is millipud, and it comes in these black boxes and it works well too. But I think it's pretty much the exact same thing. So yeah, as for this video, it's gonna be more looking towards actual usage of the stuff, more than what it's used for. So I'm not gonna be like, yeah, so you kind of go like I'm just gonna show the best ways that I've found to mix it, some do's, some don'ts, you know, just basic stuff, and a little bit of how to apply it onto puzzle pieces. So let's begin. Now the first thing, I'm just going to have this because it's a little bit makes little marks, so I'm just going to have this piece of paper here. First thing you want to do is accurately assess how much epoxy sculpt you're going to need for a project. And this is extremely difficult. And I mean extremely difficult. I have made so many puzzles, and I still have a very hard time determining how much epoxy sculpt it's going to take. And it's almost always, I didn't make enough, which is the best thing to do. If you make too much, then you're left with extra epoxy sculpt, and it sucks. And then you're tempted to go and then like blob on more just for the sake of it, and then you're left with too much on the pieces, which I'll get into in a minute. It causes problems. So assessing how much epoxy sculpt, really, it just comes with practice. I'm still not even very good at it. On the 7x7 cutter cube, the new version, I thought I had made such an obscene amount too much that I was going to be left with a big ball like this left over, and I was going to be really bummed out that I wasted so much epoxy sculpt. In reality, that didn't even get through half of the puzzle. So, yeah. So let's begin here. I guess what I'm going to use as the example piece today is one of the puzzle pieces from this. We're going to be working on, if I can get it out, sorry, this edge, basically. So, just pop an edge out here. Maybe not this puzzle. Whoops, just broke pieces off of it. I'll come back with a puzzle I can actually use. Alright, after breaking several more pieces, I totally forgot how much of a beast this thing was to take apart, I guess. Anyways, I have a piece here that we're going to be making pretty. Now, we're not actually going to be doing any building up. This is all going to be just filling in the gaps, making this look like one piece. So, judging this, eyeballing it, I reckon I need, let's see, yeah, I guess I don't have too much left here. And I ordered some, and now it got lost, so it's going to be quite a while until I get some more. Anyways, just kind of scraping away at the edges here. We're going to need a lot more than that. Okay, I think that's a little too much. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. Yeah, we'll go with this. Alright, so we want to make this into ball form. There we go. So we have a ball. And, I don't know, my fingers are a little bit dirty with the other kind, but whatever, I don't think it really combines too much. Okay. So, grab some of the other kind. And I guess if you do, cross-contaminate the two, try to grab the pieces that you cross-contaminated for build. This color is a lot stiffer, so I'm looking here, and this color is a little too big. So we want to just judge as closely as we can how big the balls are, and try to make sure they're the same size. It's still a little too big. Just pinch off a little bit, put it back in, and I reckon that's fine. It doesn't need to be the most precise thing in the world, but try to be as precise as you can. Now, for the actual combining of this, sorry about that. For the actual combining of this, I roll this into a string, as long of a string as you can get without it being too thin. And now, the other one, which is a lot tougher to roll into a string, so maybe not as long. You know, something respectable. Alright. Now we twist these two together, fold, and go like this, fold, twist, fold, twist, fold, twist. I'm going to keep this in real time so you guys can see a little bit how long it takes. There might be a cut in the video pretty quick here. Heard someone comment, they're probably going to be like, oh, how's it going? Okay. This is the most efficient way I've found to mix the two. And since I've used this method, I have had very few dud batches. And I'll go into a little bit of spotting dud batches. It's when it happens to everybody. You hastily go a little too quickly while epoxy sculpting, and you mix it not enough, and it's a little. Hi. Yeah. Making a video. Yep. Pretty good at predicting. And let's get going. And I think now, how I tell, and this might be a little bit hard to see on camera here, how do I tell that this has been? I rip it in half, and yeah, this is totally not showing up on camera, but if I see little speckles, which look like the lighter color, which I'm not really seeing, and it kind of splits apart like that, it looks good, we're ready to go. So, generally I store this kind of on the side of my workspace as a ball. So, one thing that is very nice to have when you're modding with epoxy sculpt is a little bit of water. I have a lot of water here. You need the most minute amount of water just to dip your fingers slightly to kind of wet them a little bit. Alright, so let's get into the actual filling into this piece. Alright, before I get into filling in here, one thing to note, use your time wisely. This stuff, it may seem like, yeah, you got a couple hours, but really recommend just using it up as quick as you can, because it kind of stiffs up a little bit pretty quick. Alright, so for filling in little cracks and seams like this, like these, you want this to be a seamless single piece, yet we glued a bunch of cubes together so it looks kind of strange. What I would do is I'd roll it into the thin strip, and I would place it on one side, and gently pressing, go around until you reach the other side. Now, looks pretty good, but just to be safe, I should have taken these stickers off, but whatever, I'm just going to wet my fingers a little bit, and just kind of go like this. And that will kind of get a better bond of the two, I've found, slightly. And it'll just make sure you don't have any little bubbles or or non-seamless things. Alright, yeah, that looks nice. So, that's that, and then we got to fill in this little hole. Now for holes, you don't want to be cheap. You don't want to just put in a little bit into the surface. You know, put a bit in. And yeah, so I just put in some, and of course it's not enough, so I gotta keep feeding it more and more epoxy sculpt until it gets to a point where it doesn't really need that much more. So, oh, maybe not. No, it's good. Wet your hands. Just get a little bit of, just rubbing it around. And yeah, that's looking pretty. Now I'm just gonna do this section. For these ones, just just press it in, and just you want to make sure that you completely fill in what you're trying to do, and none of the edges dip below, right? Okay, wet my fingers a little bit to get that nice and flush. That's looking good. Alright, now I'm going to take another little tiny string piece. Oops. As you can see, for a project like this, it's going to be quite extensive when I finally get around to it. I've just been too busy with bigger projects lately. And yeah, that fit in nicely. Maybe just one finger. And yeah, it's kind of a little bit hard to see, but that should work well. Yeah, you can see here I'm not putting on a huge amount, but I am putting in a bit, yeah. Alright, let's keep going here. So I'm just going to show the entire epoxy sculpting process of this piece, just for real effect. Now here, the piece is slightly too short than it needs to be, so when I press in this little bit of epoxy sculpt here, I'm also going to kind of make it go slightly beyond where it's supposed to go, and just give it a little more shape. Now for this end piece, I think it's probably safe to say this is going to need to be re-sculpted later. And don't be worried to have like a couple rounds of epoxy sculpt and sanding to get to a finished product. So yeah, just putting it in. Don't be cheap with your epoxy sculpt. Force it all the way in just to get a nice solid piece. You don't want pieces where if you push hard enough, the cap kind of epoxy sculpt would fall or cave in, basically. So I'm just kind of making this a seamless face, basically. And you can see here there's this line. Getting the lighting here. I'm just going to give that tiny little blob, and then here, and then I'm going to start wetting this slightly. And that is very nice. So let's just continue filling in the cracks. So you can see here, this is a lengthy process, and for a project like this, that's going to take a ton of epoxy sculpt, you really don't want to do it all in one batch, because if you do it all in one batch, you run the risk of, there's so many, you could wind up being called to do something, responsibilities, everybody has their responsibilities, you're modding, and then, again, things could come up, or you simply take too long. This is taking quite a long time, and I'm just doing one piece. So you can see here it's a it's a bit of a process to get a single piece like this done quite nicely. And this is not extending, which is a much more lengthy process. This is just a little bit of filling in. So, let's see, and there we go, looking good. Oh, oopsie daisy. Now, as you may have noticed, coming toward the end of this piece here, and I have not finished all the epoxy sculpt. Now that's okay, because in my case, well, the epoxy sculpting never really ends in my case, but in your guys' case, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what you do with leftover epoxy sculpt. If you really don't have anything, don't add it on to the puzzle unless you're doing like extensions or something and you're really just unsure. But for something like this, don't just blob it on, because if you just blob it on, you're just going to make things worse for sanding later. So don't just add excessive epoxy sculpt to a project just because you have more of it. If you made too much, you made too much. No big deal. But I came a little close. I mean, yeah. So this is what a fully epoxy sculpted edge would look like, or corner in this case. And yeah, it looks good. All right. So a little bit more on epoxy sculpting. Alright, so I just blobbed on the rest of that to a different piece. Anyways, some other things to know about epoxy sculpt. For the actual demonstration in this video, I think that's a decent demonstration of some basic epoxy sculpting. And the reason why I didn't want to go into extending, which is a lot more useful when you're using epoxy sculpt than filling in. Filling in does happen, and if you're making cuboids, it can certainly be a very valuable tool, and this is going to look amazing. It's going to look like one seamless piece once this is done and spray painted. It's going to look incredible. But for pieces like puzzles like the 9x9 barrel, that requires a lot of extending. And the reason why I don't want to do extending or tackle extending right now is because I'm kind of experimenting with a new method, which Crazy Bad Cuber talked to me about, like where I can't remember exactly what he was saying, but anyways, could be a lot better than any extending method I'm showing you now. So I'm going to wait off on that portion of the tutorial. Now I'm going to just talk a little bit about when to start sanding the puzzle and stuff. Now this has come out from a lot of experience, and generally 24 hours is a pretty safe bet. But yeah, here I'll show you some epoxy sculpting here. So this is part of the 7x7 cutter cube, which, to all those people that are growing slightly impatient, I can tell, it will be done today. Like, after I've done this tutorial, that is all I'm working on until I go to sleep. It will be done today. Tomorrow's video will be the mod update. Today's video is this video, and then they announce the win Thursday. So, as you can see here, this is just a little bit of re-epoxy sculpting, and this might be really hard to see in camera, but when I scratch it, you can see it makes a little bit of discoloration. Now this is a pretty good safe bet for modding. Now sometimes, and this happens every now and then, you get what I like to call a dud batch. Basically, you wait 24 hours, and sometimes a batch really goes fast, and it's only 12, but you wait 24 hours, and then you kind of, the way I test this, you just kind of lightly poke your thumbnail into the sculpt. And if it creates a little dent, kind of like very hard Play-Doh or something, and you feel this little dent, that is a good indicator it's not ready for sanding. Never sand if you dent it with your nail. And basically you have two options at this point. If it's been 24 hours, maybe 48 hours, it should have been done in this time. That means you probably have a dud batch. And in extreme cases, it's just not salvageable, but you have two options. One, you can scrape it off your puzzle, which really, really, really would suck. Or you could try to sand it. Or you have a couple options. You could try to sand it, but what I find is when you have this, it holds its form. You can't move, like you can't manipulate or distort the form, but when you can push it with your nail and it dents it. If you try to sand it, it cakes up your sandpaper. Like it binds to the sandpaper, and you're going nowhere fast, basically, and it kind of messes up your sandpaper. So what you can do is just wait it out. I've had really bad batches where I could just, after like 3 days, I could just push my thumbnail in. This is not an example of it. I'm just using it kind of as something to show. Like on this, which I just did like 5 minutes ago, you can clearly see when I push in, my thumbnail makes a print, right? Now, if a slightly less exaggerated one happens when you push in and it's been like 48 hours, you can just wait it out. And seemingly unsalvageable batches will eventually hard up if you give them ridiculous amounts of time. We're talking 2, maybe 3 weeks, and sometimes you can get it back, and something that was really squishy and not so good eventually, after a really long time, might harden up. So just to note that if you're having some kind of freaking out because, oh crap, I just made a batch of apoxie sculpt, and it could be a very large batch, which is kind of expensive, I would recommend just giving it a couple weeks, and maybe it'll harden up. I've had one time where it didn't, but most of the time it will harden up. And you definitely want to wait until it's the point where you can kind of scratch it and discolor it a little bit, but you definitely can't push in with your nail and make any kind of mark. And even if your nail isn't making a mark and you start sanding and it starts caking up your sandpaper, give it more time. But sometimes I have a batch that's ready to go in 12 hours. I can epoxy sculpt and then the same day sand it off. But that, I don't know, that's kind of a rare batch sometimes. And it's a couple other things here real quick. I'm just going to pause the video for a second. Now, when you're sanding off epoxy sculpt, like on a piece like this, one thing you got to be really careful of, even like a piece like this, is you got to be very careful about when you're finished scraping off the epoxy sculpt and when you're beginning to just pointlessly sand the puzzle. And this is kind of a fine line you got to be careful about. I'll use an example on this 13x13 piece. You see how there's these scratches here, yet if I kind of put this at an angle, you can see a little bit of shininess right around the actual epoxy sculpt, just a little bit. You can see a flicker of light here on the camera. Now that means that I really didn't sand that far in, and that the scrapes on here are not that deep. Same in here. You can see that little flicker of light, and you can see the scratches here, but you can see this little bit of light flicker. This is still smooth. I did not smooth out the piece. That's just because, you sand, and then you got to be very, very careful. You don't want to sand too far in when you're doing this, because that'll mess up the tolerances of the puzzle. You got to be very, very careful while you're sanding away lines like this. And more important than just sanding it off so it doesn't go, constantly make sure you're not sanding at a slight angle. So if you're sanding at a slight angle, and you're looking and you're like, okay, there's a little bit of scratching here, but whatever, I'm not even, you don't even think about it. You're like, yeah, I'm not scratching the piece, I'm just scratching the epoxy sculpt, scratch, and then, oh crap, this side is the right length, but then this side is like a little minuscule bit thinner because you sanded at an angle. That's just a little bit to keep in mind. Now, yeah, for little angles like this, like sharp angles, I find it very hard to get sandpaper into angles like this. What I do is I actually just use the X-Acto knife and kind of slowly scrape away at it. It seems to do the trick. I may not do that for pieces that are showing, but since this is going to be hidden inside the puzzle, it'll be fine. Anyways, this is my puzzle, you know, a little bit of knowledge on epoxy sculpt. Thank you guys for watching. I'll have another video on epoxy sculpt sometime in the future, and that's going to be focusing a lot more on the extending with epoxy sculpt and a lot more on sanding epoxy sculpt. But I think really there's not too much besides just being very careful not to scratch the original piece. I mean, it's okay to scratch the original piece. That has to happen for you to get to flush, but you really want to be mindful of how much you scratch into the original piece. Now what you might be thinking is, well, why don't I, instead of blob on, you know, a fair bit here, I put a fair bit. Perhaps a lot too much now that I look at it, but, you know, I mean, it's okay. It's not that much. You don't want to, like, get your water and you're really just, like, rubbing it in, and it's getting to the point where it's almost flush by itself without sanding. One reason why you don't want to do that, and that is because it's really hard to get that to happen without water, and that water kind of moisturizes the little edge of it, and then when it dries, there's going to be a very slight indent, and that means you got to scratch into the puzzle to get rid of the indent, and you know, kind of, you don't want to scratch into the puzzle. Anyways, this is very basic using of epoxy sculpt. I'm using Ave Studio epoxy sculpt. I'm not going to leave a link in the description where to buy it because I'm not 100% sure about this website. They seem to be nice with the whole ordeal that I ordered 5 pounds of epoxy sculpt from them back in the beginning of July, and it's still not here. And yeah, the other day I was like, hey, it's not here, and they're like, oh crap. So I don't know. I might link it into descriptions once I get that order and it's all good. But anyways, thank you for watching.